Thank you for meeting with us.
Of course.
And I guess I kind of wanted to start off with a little bit of an oddball question, which is, since this has all happened, I'm just kind of curious if there's been an interesting experience or a strange experience or an odd experience, either stemming from the filibuster or now that you've kind of become a kind of national celebrity. Has there been an experience that was strange or weird or encouraging or discouraging, or something that happened that you think, okay, this is kind of unique to this moment where this is, all this is happening? I'm just kind of curious if there's been a moment like that.
I mean, not really a moment, but many moments since then.
Mm-hmm.
Back in the district and out on the road, young women, particularly young women, millennial generation women, are coming and speaking to me about how empowered they feel right now. And I think if we had made every effort to try to make that happen, we never could have come up with the recipe that arrived at it.
Yeah.
And what's been so beautiful about this is it was organic and real and therefore incredibly meaningful for these young women. And they are owning the way they feel right now. And I expect that it's the beginning of a new momentum. I really believe that.
Do you get the impression that this was something organic that sprung up mostly around this bill, or do you think this is something that had been kind of building up over the course of the cuts to family planning funds, the sonogram bill, the dispute over the women's health program, a lot of these things we've had happen in Texas? Do you get a sense of whether this was energy that sprung up around this event, this bill, the special session, or was that kind of the spark that lit what had been kind of building up over time?
I think a little bit of both. When you think about the women who really, in a real world experience, understand what happened with the 2011 budget cuts, the 130,000 women or more who were cut away from their only health service that they had. Those women definitely know what's happening because they feel it. But there are many other women who, either don't live in those remote areas that were so severely impacted. Even though they may use those services, they're still there for them in urban areas in large part. So you may have those women who haven't really felt it. But then there are women who haven't had need for that and haven't understood even that legislators a couple of years ago made these draconian cuts. So for some women, this sparked an unleashing of a pent-up anger and despair, honestly, in what was happening to them. For other women, it simply woke them up to what they didn't understand was happening at all. So it was a little bit of a lightning rod in both ways.
You mentioned that this was an awakening in some ways, and I'm curious if you think, I've heard two takes on kind of what's happening. One is that this is the beginning of something that could have a profound effect on Texas and Texas politics. And I've also heard people say, well, this is a lot of energy that's happening now, but it's kind of bound to fade away. And I'm curious if you have a sense or you have an impression or you have an opinion on which way that might go from anything that you've seen. Tough question, I know.
It is,
yeah.
of course. No one can predict.
Yeah.
No one can predict. But I would be really surprised to see it go away. And I'll compare it for a moment to what we saw in response to the education funding cuts that occurred last session. The public outcry against that in no way compared to what we're seeing about this bill right now. And yet it sustained itself through the election cycle. I know it played an important role in my reelection, my difficult reelection race in 2012. And to the extent that occurred, I think it will be magnified many-fold over this particular issue, because this one hits multi-generational people, women and men who love and care about women, men who have daughters who know that their daughters will be impacted by this. And it's not just a small section of people who happen to have kids in public schools. It's so much broader than that. And there is a unique energy behind it. I've never experienced anything like it in my public service life of 15 years. So I think it will sustain, and I honestly think it will grow because there's an active energy trying to make sure that that happens.
I want to ask about the cuts from last session, and then there were some actions taken on that during the regular session. I know that some money was restored through primary care funding, and yet we've already seen a lot of clinics close. Carolyn's done some great reporting for us about 60 some odd clinics have closed already. When you think back on the regular session, do you feel like the legislature has sufficiently addressed the cuts to family planning services that were made in 2011? Or do you think that it was only kind of a partial restoration and there's still lingering damage that the legislature should address?
There's extensive lingering damage. First of all, the $100 million that was put back for services that are directed at women was put back into the primary healthcare arena, not specific to family planning services where it once was. About 60% of that will go to family planning, but the remainder will not. And that's not to say that women don't need a broader, more holistic care approach. They certainly do. But financially, it leaves a gap. More than that, though, much more alarming than that, is the safety net that was once there was shredded with those cuts. It's easy for clinics to close overnight. It's very hard for them to reopen quickly, particularly where there is some nervousness and caution about whether this will be a sustained source of funding. With the exclusion of Planned Parenthood from all sources of these women health funds now in Texas, we know that 45% of the service that was being provided to women in this arena can no longer qualify for those funds. And so regardless of the fact that another $60 million was thrown at it, when you cut out 45% of the people who were doing that work from being able to receive those funds, and you think about all of the family planning clinics that closed that were not Planned Parenthood clinics, you cannot rebuild that overnight. We're already seeing some statistics in terms of what's been happening as a consequence of that. There were projections about the Medicaid birth rate increasing. I'm disappointed to say that it's been hard to get that information even out of our own state agency. As a state senator, it's been hard to get that information, and there's a reason it's hard to get it, because it's telling a story that they don't want told. And you know, it's not only a human tragedy, it truly is a human tragedy. We know that women are becoming pregnant that would have otherwise chosen not to. And now women are confronting a very difficult choice. Women are having babies that they can't afford. I read a very sad story in Bloomberg News this morning about a woman who talked about the fact that she was now going in her last month of Medicaid coverage to be sterilized because she can't afford birth control. She just had her third child who she couldn't afford and didn't want to have, but she didn't have her family planning birth control that she once had. She was one of those people that lost her safety net. And so now she's going to have to make a permanent decision about her future family planning because it's the only alternative that she's been left with. These are human tragedies and human consequences, but there are also fiscally imprudent decisions that are being made. If all we cared about was a conservative approach, which I think we can all agree with, let's prevent rather than pay for later. Let's save a lot of money doing that. That's not what's happening right now. And the recent estimate that I have been given on the cost of those unplanned births is that we are now spending $1.3 billion per year on those unplanned births across Texas. Or, you know, let me back up. I'm not sure that you could say all of that was unplanned. But that is the Medicaid birth cost, much of which is an unplanned situation. So